Today we are going to the late 19th century, so sit back as we go to Australia. Martha Needle was born on the 9th of April 1864 near the small town of Morgan in South Australia. The town is about 160 kilometres northeast of the state capital Adelaide and sits on the banks of the Murray River. Martha's father was called Joseph Henry Childs, but he separated from her mother named Mary before Martha was born, and when she was very young, her mother moved to Port Lincoln and then on to Adelaide, before eventually remarrying a man called Daniel Foran. He was originally from Ireland and arrived in Australia with the 2nd Somersetshire Regiment. He deserted 3 times, and each time had the letter D tattooed under his arm. By all accounts, he was a rough and aggressive character. Martha had a hard upbringing. Her mother and stepfather would drink and argue, and in 1876, he was sent to prison for 2 years. When she was 12 years old, Martha was sent to work in domestic service for a nice lady named Mrs. Drew. She proved to be a hard worker and stayed working in Port Adelaide for the next 5 years, until in 1881 she met and married a man named Henry Needle. Henry was 4 years older than Martha, having been born in 1860, and was from a small village called Weedon in the county of Northamptonshire in England. He had arrived in Australia with his parents, brother, and 3 sisters. Once married, Martha and Henry decided that in order to find better paying work, they should move to Sydney. At the time, the country was experiencing an economic boom, and as Henry was a skilled carpenter, he was able to secure a good job and a respectable income. In November 1882, Martha gave birth to a daughter, who they named Mabel, and 2 years later, their second daughter was born, who they named Elsie. At the start of 1885, the family moved to Melbourne. The city had benefited from the 1850s gold rush and had become one of the wealthiest cities in the world. There were even more opportunities for Henry, and the family settled in the suburb of Richmond. Martha was now living in a comfortable house and had a hard-working husband and 2 daughters. She had come a long way from the difficult upbringing she had had with her mother and stepfather in Adelaide. They had not been in their new home for very long when tragedy struck, as the couple's eldest daughter Mabel became sick, and after a short illness, she died. The doctor certified that the cause of death was respiratory and cardiac bronchitis. Friends and neighbours tried to comfort Martha, but she was bereft with grief and fell into a deep state of mourning. Like many people in the 19th century, Martha had taken out a life insurance policy on her family, and Mabel's death paid out the sum of £100. This was a reasonable amount of money in 1885, but the death of their daughter seemed to affect Henry and Martha's relationship. Henry was also finding it harder to find work, so decided to take up a position in Sydney while his family stayed in Richmond. With her husband away, Martha started to go out and soon became a very popular figure in the pubs and taverns around her neighbourhood. Henry would occasionally return home, and in 1886 their 3rd child was born, who they named May. The new baby, however, did nothing to improve the couple's marriage. Henry returned to Richmond and started working in Melbourne, but he became a sullen and withdrawn individual, and while his wife was a popular figure in the local community, he mainly spent his time at home with his daughters. In 1889, Henry became sick. Martha called their doctor, named Dr. George Hodgson. He had always known Henry to be a fit and healthy man, but now he was very ill. Martha attended her husband, but strangely he would not eat any food that she prepared for him. He did not say why he would not eat it, he just wouldn't. Henry grew weaker, and as his sickness got worse, he eventually died on the 4th of October, 1889, and the cause of death was registered as subacute hepatitis. Dr. Hodgson and the friends and neighbours of Henry and Martha Needle were moved by the devoted care that Martha had given her husband during his illness, and told the grieving widow that she could console herself in the knowledge that she attended Henry until the end. Upon her husband's death, Martha received £60 from a life insurance company. The rest was reinvested for the benefit of her two daughters, Elsie and May. Martha's life, however, went from one tragedy to the next. A year after losing her husband, her daughter Elsie was suddenly taken ill and died on the 9th of December 1890. She had been suffering from sickness and had been attended by Dr. Hodgson. The life insurance company paid Martha another £60. Less than a year later, Martha's only living child, May, became ill. Her mother attended her day and night, and the doctor was a frequent visitor. But on the 27th of August, 1891, she died, and the death certificate stated that the death was due to tubercular meningitis. Martha was again paid £60 by the insurance company. Grief had not been a stranger to Martha Needle, who tragically had lost her husband and 3 children in the space of 6 years. The following year, in 1892, Martha decided to find work. She had worked in domestic service when she was young, so when the opportunity arose, she moved to 137 Bridge Road, Richmond, to keep house for 2 brothers, named Otto and Louis Juncan. They had moved to Richmond from the small South Australian town of Lyndoch. Their father, who had come to Australia from Norway, had died the previous year, and the brothers operated a small saddlery business from the premises. Their other brother and mother, who was originally from Ireland, lived in Adelaide. As well as keeping house for the brothers, Martha was also able to sublet the adjacent property and take in lodgers. Shortly after their first encounter, Otto and Martha started a relationship, and it did not take long for them to become engaged. Martha was very happy with her new romantic interest. He was the same age as her and was an intelligent man who displayed a lot of entrepreneurial spirits, but his brother Louis was not very happy with his brother's choice of bride. He considered Martha's behaviour to be strange. She had a terrible temper and was prone to mood swings. He found her to be somewhat irrational, and occasionally she went out to search for her dead children. Otto's mother also wrote to her son, expressing her disapproval of Martha as a future daughter-in-law. Pressure from the family was put on Otto to end the engagement, but he refused. Louis and Otto continued to build their business, and whenever Martha was ill-tempered, Louis would remind his brother that he was engaged to her. Then in August 1893, Louis became ill. He remained ill for 10 days with stomach pains. Fortunately, a relative came to nurse him, and he slowly recovered. After his illness, he reluctantly accepted that his brother was going to marry Martha, and his health seemed to greatly improve. But on the 25th of April 1894, he again fell ill with strange symptoms: vomiting, a sore mouth and gums, and a sore tongue. A relative again came to look after him, and he started feeling better. But on May the 10th, she left, and Louis was again cared for by the attentive Martha. However, his condition worsened, and on May the 15th, 1894, Louis Juncan died at the house in Bridge Road. The doctor stated that the cause of death was due to exhaustion and inflammation of the stomach and membranes of the heart. Upon hearing the terrible news of the loss of Louis, Otto's mother, named Margaret, and his brother Herman came to Richmond to settle Louis's estate, and also to speak to Otto about his relationship with Martha. Despite their attempts to get Otto to end his engagement, he was unwilling to leave his fiancée. Martha became very concerned about Otto's mother and brother's involvement in her relationship, and was constantly worried that the family may influence Otto to end the engagement. She became despondent and temperamental. Every time she saw Herman speaking to Otto, she wondered if he was opposing their marriage. Martha had been preparing the food and trying her best to be a good host to Otto's family, but Herman soon became ill. A couple of days later he recovered, but then was taken ill again. This time he felt worse and had very painful, violent stomach cramps. A doctor named Dr. Boyd visited the house and suspected that Herman may have been poisoned. He took a sample of Herman's vomit and sent it to the government laboratory for analysis. The analysis soon reported back that the sample contained high levels of arsenic. Herman wondered what to do next. His brother was totally besotted with Martha. Some may not believe that it was her who tried to poison him. He decided to go to the police, and they worked out a plan of how to catch her in the act. Herman returned to the house, saying that he felt a lot better, and made pleasant conversation with Martha. Meanwhile, the police waited out of view near the house, and Herman politely asked Martha for a cup of tea. When the tea arrived, Herman blew a whistle, and the police entered the property. They restrained Martha, who was trying to get the tea from Herman, and then they took it away to be analysed. When the results came back, it showed that the cup of tea contained 10 grains of arsenic. Martha was then charged with attempted murder, and an investigation began. Louis's body was exhumed, and it was found to contain 3.4 grains of arsenic. 2 grains were enough to kill someone. The authorities also exhumed the bodies of Henry Needle and the children Mabel, Elsie and May. It was confirmed that all 3 contained traces of arsenic. The papers filled their front pages with the case and dubbed Martha the Richmond poisoner. When the trial started in September 1894, the courtroom was packed, and despite the evidence and the public feeling towards her, Martha proclaimed her innocence throughout. The prosecution presented the forensic evidence and proved that on May the 10th, 1894, Martha had purchased a box of Rough-on Rats, which was an arsenic-based poison designed to kill rodents. 5 days after the purchase, Louis Juncan died. Her defence counsel proved that Martha suffered from periods of unconsciousness, and it often seemed that she did not know what she was doing. Witnesses told the court that there were times when she went to find her children, apparently unaware that they had died. The defence stated that she was not of sound mind and could not be held responsible for her actions. When her fiancé Otto was presented as a witness, he said that he noticed that she was often subjected to fits or faints. These would occur at any time without warning. He said that she would fall suddenly to the ground, and it would be as if she were stuck. He added that when these happened, Martha would be quite unconscious. The defence looked for the sympathy of the court. They outlined how Martha was raised in extremely poor conditions and had endured a dreadful upbringing, which she only escaped when she married. She had an impulsive personality, and one witness stated that Martha would regularly hear voices. They added that she was a troubled woman who lacked any support. They also produced witnesses who said that Martha seemed to be a proud and doting mother, something very inconsistent with the crime for which she was on trial. Justice Hodges, however, rejected Martha's plea of insanity, observing, "The law cannot wait while philosophers, physicians and scientists settle metaphysical problems. Justice must be swift and sure." When the 3-day trial ended, the all-male jury took just 40 minutes to find the defendant, Martha Needle, guilty of murder and gave no recommendation for mercy. The judge sentenced her to death. It was reported that Martha received the death sentence with extraordinary calmness. She walked out of the dock, unassisted and with a firm step, as if she had accepted her fate. After the verdict, a letter was sent to the governor, the Earl of Hopetoun, on behalf of the Victorian branch of the Howard Association for the Prevention of Crime. The letter asked for the sentence to be commuted on the grounds of insanity. Lord Hopetoun referred the letter to the Government Attorney General, who rejected the request. Martha was sent to Melbourne prison, where she spent her time with her Bible and prayer book. She continued to maintain her innocence. The prison warden said that she was a model prisoner, very quiet and polite. Martha Needle was hanged on the 22nd of October 1894. In her will, she left all of her possessions to Otto, who had supported her throughout. But the story does not end here, as Martha had an older sister named Eileen, and 3 decades after Martha's trial and execution, Eileen's son, who was also Martha's nephew and was named Alexander Newland Lee, was found guilty of murdering his wife and 3 of their 7 children by poisoning them with strychnine. He was hanged in Adelaide. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As per usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I will see you in the next brief case.